History is full of rulers who wanted land, gold, power, and obedience. But some went further and demanded things so weird they sound like rejected comedy sketches written by a feverish court jester. Today, we're looking at 32 rulers who turned paranoia, vanity, ego, and pure nonsense into official policy. From forbidden hats to human flytraps, this is what happens when one person has too much power and absolutely nobody brave enough to say, "Your Majesty, that is insane." 1. Every dictator needs a recognizable brand, but Mabu Cesco of Zaire did not stop at speeches, portraits, and the usual giant ruler energy. He turned a hat into protected state property. His signature accessory was a leopard skin cap, so closely tied to his image that it practically became the official crown of his personal mythology. And because ordinary vanity was clearly too modest, Mobutu issued a decree banning everyone else in the country from wearing leopard skin hats. This was not some noble wildlife policy suddenly dropped from heaven. This was fashion control with a presidential stamp. Imagine waking up in a country where the police could care less about your politics for 5 seconds because your hat was committing identity theft. In Mobutu's Zaire, clothing was not just clothing, it was hierarchy. He alone got to look like the leopard print boss character, while everyone else had to keep their heads legally boring. 2. King Henry VIII of England was rich, powerful, and so paranoid that even his pillow could not be trusted. By the later part of his reign, Henry saw enemies everywhere, which to be fair was easier when you had spent years creating them professionally. His fear reached the royal bedroom, where he worried that someone might poison the sheets, the duvet, or the pillowcases. So he created one of the strangest bedtime security routines in royal history. His trusted servants, the grooms of the stool, had to prepare the bed, then kneel down and kiss the linens before the king used them. This was not a cute gesture of loyalty to Egyptian cotton. It was a poison test, with humiliation included at no extra charge. If the servant did not collapse, Henry could climb into bed feeling safer. In that palace, career advancement meant being trusted enough to risk death by pillowcase before the king took a nap. 3. Frederick William I of Prussia, known as the Soldier King, loved discipline so much that even relaxation had to stand at attention. His favorite evening ritual was the tobacco parliament, a mandatory gathering where his ministers and generals sat with him, drank beer, smoked tobacco, and discussed state business. In theory, this sounds like a smoky old boys club. In practice, it was a forced political sauna where everyone had to look entertained while the king interrogated them through a cloud of pipe smoke. And if someone did not smoke? Wonderful news. The king did not care. The unlucky non-smoker still had to attend and keep an unlit clay pipe in his mouth because apparently the room needed visual consistency more than human comfort. It was government meeting, drinking contest, loyalty test, and second-hand smoke endurance trial all at once. You were not merely judged on your ideas. You were judged on your ability to look relaxed while slowly becoming furniture in a tavern-shaped monarchy. 4. Centuries before modern environmental campaigns, King Edward I of England found himself at war with London's filthy air. The city had begun burning cheap sea coal, and the smoke it produced was thick, harsh, and miserable. The kind of medieval smog that made breathing feel like licking a chimney. Edward disliked it intensely and believed it was harmful to health, which was unusually sensible for an era that still considered many terrible medical ideas perfectly normal. In 1273, he issued a proclamation banning the burning of sea coal in London while Parliament was in session. But because this was the Middle Ages, the punishment was not a friendly warning or a fine tucked under the door. Violators could face torture or even execution. So one of history's early anti-pollution rules came with an absolutely medieval customer service policy. Stop making the king inhale your cheap smoky fuel, or the government may respond with extreme enthusiasm. 5. Ottoman Sultan Ibrahim I ruled during a messy and unstable period, but his personal passion was very clear: fur. Not a tasteful collar, not a fancy winter cloak, not one dramatic hat for special occasions. Ibrahim developed an obsession with sable so intense that it started to look less like luxury and more like a budgetary hostage situation. He reportedly demanded that rooms in his palace be lined with sable fur, from walls to ceilings to curtains, as if he wanted to live inside the world's most expensive animal-themed blanket fort. Sable was one of the costliest materials available, and covering palace interiors with it was not just extravagant, it was financially deranged. While the empire had real problems demanding real leadership, Ibrahim was busy turning royal architecture into a furry, sensory experience. Imagine being a court official trying to discuss military crisis while the Sultan gently touches the wall like it is a beloved pet. That is not governance. That is upholstery madness with imperial authority. 6. Benito Mussolini carefully built an image of strength, masculinity, and unstoppable command, but one of his daily habits turned that image into a biological threat. He had a fierce love for raw garlic, and not in the modest, a little seasoning way. He reportedly ate entire bowls of chopped garlic mixed with olive oil and lemon juice, believing it boosted his health, vigor, and general dictator energy. Unfortunately, what it definitely boosted was the radius of suffering around his mouth. His wife, Rochelle, found the smell so overwhelming that she often slept in a separate room. So here was a man trying to project imperial power, yet losing the battle for shared bedroom space to his own breath. He wanted to revive Roman greatness, but first he had to survive domestic garlic diplomacy. His speeches may have been loud, his gestures theatrical, and his uniforms carefully chosen, but one exhale could probably have cleared a meeting faster than any police order. 7. By the late 13th century, London at night was not exactly a peaceful postcard of medieval charm. Its narrow alleys were dark, cramped, and perfect for robbery, stabbing, and the kind of sudden violence that makes curfew sound less like control and more like survival advice. King Edward I, known as Longshanks, decided the city needed a sharper legal response to all the sharp objects wandering around after dark. He issued a proclamation banning men inside the city walls from carrying long knives, pugios, or other bladed weapons after the curfew bell had rung. If you were caught armed at night, punishment could be severe. It was one of the early attempts at urban weapon control, long before anyone used modern terms for it. The royal message was simple. If you must be angry after sunset, please express yourself with words, not surprise surgery. Medieval London was still dangerous, of course, but Edward tried to make the nightlife slightly less stab-forward. 8. Lycurgus, the legendary lawgiver of Sparta, wanted to create warriors so disciplined that even dinner had to feel like military training. He established public mess halls called syssitia, where male citizens were required to eat together instead of enjoying private family meals. The goal was to crush luxury, strengthen unity, and make sure no Spartan got dangerously comfortable with soft living, pleasant conversation, or food that did not taste like a punishment. The most infamous dish was black broth, usually described as a grim mixture of pork, salt, vinegar, and blood. That is not a meal. That is a battlefield in liquid form. Private dining was discouraged because Sparta did not want citizens thinking of themselves as individuals with cozy homes and personal tastes. It wanted them as parts of a war machine. So every dinner became a public performance of toughness. In Sparta, chewing was civic duty, swallowing was discipline, and asking for a nicer soup probably counted as emotional weakness. 9. Mughal Emperor Jahangir cared deeply about the image of justice, and he understood something every ruler with a flair for drama understands. Symbolism matters. To show that even the poorest subject could reach him, he ordered the installation of the famous Chain of Justice. This was a grand golden chain decorated with many bells, stretching from his palace to a post near the river. In theory, anyone who had been wronged could pull the chain, ring the bells, and get the emperor's attention directly, bypassing corrupt officials and slow courts. It was a beautiful idea, and also a terrifying one. Imagine being an ordinary citizen standing there thinking, yes, my complaint is serious, but is it serious enough to wake the emperor and make a giant golden alarm scream into his palace? The chain was part justice system, part royal theater, part customer service hotline made of gold. Whether many dared to use it or not, the message was clear. The emperor wanted to be seen as the final bell-ringing answer to injustice. 10. José Gaspar Rodríguez de Francia, Paraguay's first dictator, carried paranoia to such an extreme that his daily walks became public rehearsals in fear. He believed assassins could be hiding anywhere, so he created rules that transformed the capital into a temporary ghost town whenever he passed through. As his procession approached, citizens had to close their shutters. Anyone caught outside had to throw themselves face down on the ground and remain there without looking up until he had gone by. Breaking the rule could mean death, because nothing says secure leadership like executing people for eye contact. For a few minutes each day, normal life froze. Windows shut, streets emptied, bodies hit the ground, and the entire city performed the dictator's anxiety like a civic ceremony. Most rulers want applause, cheering, and adoring faces. Francia wanted silence, closed shutters, and a population pretending to be floor decorations. His fear of his own people was so total that being seen by them became a threat. 11. When Qin Shi Huang unified China, he did not just want political control. He wanted control over memory itself. After bringing the warring states under his rule, he pushed the idea that civilization had effectively restarted with him, because apparently conquering kingdoms was not enough unless the past also agreed to resign. In 213 before Christ, he ordered the destruction of many historical and philosophical texts connected to earlier traditions. Practical works on subjects like medicine, agriculture, and divination were spared, because even a ruthless emperor still needed crops, treatments, and someone to tell him whether Tuesday looked lucky. But old histories and rival schools of thought were dangerous because they offered comparison, criticism, and alternative ways of thinking. Scholars who hid banned writings or discussed forbidden ideas faced brutal punishment. This was not ordinary censorship. It was a royal attempt to delete the intellectual competition. Qin Shi Huang wanted a world where history did not argue with him, because history had been forced into the fire. 12. Empress Elisabeth of Austria, better known as Sisi, did not simply have beautiful long hair. She ran it like a demanding royal institution with its own schedule, rituals, and emotional emergencies. Her hair famously reached the floor, and caring for it could take around 3 hours a day. Her personal hairdresser had a job that sounded glamorous until you realize it came with the stress level of handling national security documents made of silk. After the washing, combing, and braiding, every fallen strand had to be collected and presented to the empress on a silver tray. Sisi would inspect the damage like a judge reviewing battlefield losses. If she thought too many hairs had come out, the stylist could be scolded or even slapped. This was not a beauty routine, it was a daily audit of a living crown. The hair was gorgeous, yes, but it also functioned like a floor-length tyrant, forcing everyone around it into obedience, patience, and quiet panic. 13. King Henry IV of France had charm, confidence, and a personal aroma that apparently deserved its own diplomatic envoy. In a time when bathing was already not winning any popularity contests, Henry became especially known for his powerful body odor. The remarkable part is that he did not treat this as a flaw. He treated it as proof of raw masculine energy, a natural royal presence, and possibly even romantic magnetism. He reportedly told one lover not to wash before his return, which is the kind of love letter that makes modern noses file a complaint. Henry also disliked heavy perfumes, preferring people around him to exist in what we might politely call a more authentic atmosphere. For courtiers and lovers, this created a very specific job requirement: breathe near the king and pretend everything was fine. In his inner circle, luxury did not smell like roses. It smelled like confidence, sweat, and a ruler who believed soap was interrupting the mood. 14. Sapar Murat Niyazov, the dictator of Turkmenistan, had an ego so large it apparently needed its own calendar system. Portraits, statues, and official slogans were not enough. In 2002, he passed a law renaming months of the year and days of the week, because why merely rule the present when you can edit time itself? January became Turkmenbashi, his self-given title meaning leader of the Turkmen. April was renamed after his late mother, Gurban Sultan. Then, in a move so weirdly personal it almost feels like parody, he also renamed bread after her. Imagine walking into a bakery and realizing even lunch has been drafted into the ruler's family mythology. This was not just vanity. It was a full cultural replacement project where ordinary language was reshaped around one man's personality cult. Birthdays, schedules, paperwork, meals, and basic conversation all had to carry the fingerprints of Niyazov's ego. He did not simply want loyalty. He wanted daily life to pronounce his importance out loud. 15. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II was intelligent, curious, and fascinated by questions about nature, language, and human origins. Unfortunately, one of his experiments became a chilling reminder that curiosity without compassion can turn monstrous very quickly. He wanted to discover the natural language of humanity, the original tongue people would supposedly speak if no one taught them anything. To test this, he ordered newborn infants to be raised in isolation from normal affection and speech. Caregivers were allowed to feed and wash the babies, but they were forbidden to speak to them, cuddle them, comfort them, or show tenderness. The emperor hoped the children would eventually reveal some ancient, divine language on their own. Instead, the experiment ended in tragedy. Deprived of human contact and emotional care, the babies died. It is one of the darkest ruler demands on this list because it was not just bizarre. It was cruel in a painfully modern way, turning helpless children into instruments for an idea that never deserved them. 16. Muammar Gaddafi of Libya understood spectacle. His public image blended danger, eccentricity, fashion, and confusion so thoroughly that it often felt like politics performed by a man designing his own myth in real time. One of the most famous examples was his all-female bodyguard unit, often called the Amazonian Guard. These women were trained to protect him and appeared in military-style uniforms, sometimes paired with makeup and high heels, creating a visual mix of intimidation and theatrical branding. But the reported requirements were deeply strange. Gaddafi allegedly insisted that members of the guard be virgins, turning a security detail into a creepy personal symbol wrapped in propaganda. On the surface, it looked like a dramatic image of female power in a region dominated by male authority. Up close, it was much more unsettling, a ruler using women's bodies, loyalty, and appearance as part of his personal mythology. It was protection, performance, and authoritarian weirdness marching together in polished boots. 17. Kim Jong-il of North Korea treated his meals like matters of state security, and rice received the kind of attention most governments reserve for nuclear codes. He was reportedly obsessed with the quality and appearance of every grain served to him. To satisfy this demand, a special team of women inspected the rice by hand before it was cooked. They sat for hours with tweezers, examining grain after grain for perfect size, shape, and color. Anything too long, too short, chipped, discolored, or insufficiently majestic was rejected. While ordinary North Koreans faced hunger and famine, the leader's rice had to pass a beauty contest conducted at microscopic scale. It is hard to imagine a clearer symbol of dictatorship than people starving while one man's dinner is edited with tweezers. This was not simply picky eating. It was control reduced to its smallest edible unit. Even a grain of rice had to understand the hierarchy and present itself properly before entering the dear leader's bowl. 18. Frederick the Great of Prussia faced a strange agricultural problem. His people did not want potatoes. To them, this underground lump looked suspicious, dirty, foreign, tasteless, and possibly ungodly, which is a lot of moral pressure to place on a vegetable. Frederick understood that simply ordering people to grow potatoes was not enough. Commanding peasants to love a crop usually produces resentment, not recipes. So he used reverse psychology with royal flair. He planted potato fields and had soldiers guard them, making the potatoes appear rare, valuable, and reserved for the king. Then he secretly instructed the guards to be deliberately careless. The result was beautifully predictable. Locals began sneaking in at night to steal the mysterious royal crop and plant it in their own gardens. Frederick made the potato desirable by making it look forbidden. Instead of forcing people to obey, he tricked them into feeling clever. It was one of history's finest examples of agricultural marketing by fake security theater. 19. Frederick the Great did not stop at manipulating people into eating potatoes. He also developed a serious problem with coffee, or more accurately with the economic consequences of coffee. The drink was becoming fashionable, but Frederick worried it threatened beer. And beer mattered because it supported local production and tax revenue. So he created a state monopoly on coffee and tried to restrict who could roast it. Then came the truly absurd enforcement method: coffee sniffers. These were former soldiers hired to walk the streets and literally smell the air for illegal coffee roasting. Their noses became tools of state surveillance. If they detected the delicious aroma of forbidden beans, they reported the offenders. Imagine living in a country where your morning routine could become evidence. One minute you are roasting coffee, the next minute some government nostril has identified your kitchen as a threat to national order. It was culinary espionage at its strangest, proving that authoritarian policy can smell like breakfast. 20. King Christian VII of Denmark struggled with severe mental illness, and his reign often left real power in the hands of others. But one of the strangest stories connected to him involves his beloved poodle, Gourmand. The king was so attached to the dog that he reportedly demanded Gourmand be given an official seat on the state council. Ministers and officials, who probably already had enough problems managing a kingdom, now had to share political space with a poodle treated like a fellow decision-maker. Christian would pause discussions to consult the dog, interpreting barks, whines, or movements as if they carried the weight of policy advice. Imagine a serious government meeting where taxation, foreign affairs, and military concerns are being discussed, and everyone has to wait because His Majesty is checking what the fluffy council member thinks. The situation was tragic, absurd, and deeply revealing. At that court, political authority could become so distorted that a poodle's bark might outrank human expertise. 21. Roman Emperor Nero wanted to be remembered not only as a ruler, but as a great artist. He fancied himself a singer, actor, poet, and performer of dazzling genius. The problem was that genuine artistic success requires audiences who are free to dislike you, and Nero was not exactly a man who welcomed honest feedback. So he created a personal cheering squad known as the Augustans, numbering around 5,000 men. Their job was to attend his performances and applaud with organized enthusiasm. This was not random clapping. They trained in specific applause techniques designed to create waves of approval at the right moments. Nero essentially invented a state-sponsored hype machine. Bad song? Thunderous applause. Awkward poem? Thunderous applause. Emperor performing for hours while everyone silently prays for release? Thunderous applause. Long before fake followers and paid engagement, Nero had the ancient version, a human algorithm of forced admiration, making sure his ego never had to sit alone in silence. 22. Pharaoh. Pepi II of ancient Egypt faced one of the smallest enemies imaginable: flies. For ordinary people, the solution would be swatting, waving a fan, or accepting that summer is rude. But Pepi was a pharaoh, treated like a living god, so personal inconvenience required human suffering to solve. According to ancient accounts, he ordered enslaved people to be stripped and covered in honey, then positioned near him so flies would be attracted to them instead of bothering him. They became living fly traps, standing there in misery while the ruler enjoyed his clean little bubble of comfort. The idea is so grotesque that it almost sounds like a dark joke, until you remember that real bodies were used for one man's convenience. This was power and laziness fused into one horrifying image. Pepi did not merely command labor. He outsourced irritation itself, proving that absolute authority can turn even insect control into a moral disaster. 23. King George IV of the United Kingdom cared deeply about appearance, style, and looking like a dignified royal figure. Unfortunately, his love of indulgence, rich food, and luxury created a body that did not match the heroic image he wanted to project. So instead of changing his habits, George turned to engineering. He spent vast sums on custom-made corsets designed to compress, lift, and reshape his body into something closer to the elegant silhouette expected of a monarch. These were not delicate little fashion items. They were structural support systems for royal vanity, built to contain the consequences of a very expensive appetite. He relied on them so heavily that rumors claimed he was buried in one. Whether or not that final detail is true, the image is unforgettable. A king using technology, tailoring, and serious money to make his body obey propaganda. Some rulers built roads, fleets, or monuments. George invested in the infrastructure required to hide desert. 24. Kubla Khan was a visionary ruler, and his use of paper money across the Mongol Empire was genuinely revolutionary. But the way he introduced it was less, "Please enjoy this convenient innovation," and more, "Accept the paper or meet the executioner." In the 13th century, he made paper currency produced from mulberry bark the only legal money in much of his empire. Gold, silver, and other traditional forms of payment were no longer acceptable in ordinary exchange. Anyone who refused the paper notes or tried to use old forms of currency could face death. That is one way to encourage adoption. Kublai's policy helped normalize the use of paper money on a massive scale, but it did so through brute force. It was an economic revolution delivered with an execution clause. The message was clear. Value is what the state says it is, and if you disagree, your personal financial theory may become extremely short-lived. 25. Caligula's ego was so large that ordinary worship apparently felt underwhelming. The Roman emperor did not merely want people to honor him like a god. He wanted actual gods to start looking like him. According to ancient accounts, he ordered famous sacred statues of Greek deities, including major figures like Zeus, to be brought to Rome. Once there, he had their heads removed and replaced with sculpted versions of his own face. It was divine identity theft in marble. Imagine entering a temple, ready to pray to an ancient god, only to find Caligula staring back at you with imperial confidence, and probably the expression of a man who has never heard the word enough. This was not just vanity, it was blasphemy as interior design. Caligula wanted to overwrite the gods visually, turning sacred space into another advertisement for himself. Most rulers seek legitimacy from religion. Caligula seemed to ask why religion could not simply borrow his head. 26. Qin Shi Huang conquered rival states, unified China, and built a legacy so massive that it still dominates historical imagination. But after conquering kingdoms, he turned toward the one territory no army could seize: death. He became obsessed with immortality and sent expeditions searching for the elixir of life. Court alchemists promised him substances that could preserve him forever, and among their supposed solutions were pills containing mercury. To ancient seekers of immortality, mercury could appear mysterious, powerful, and almost magical. To the human nervous system, it is poison wearing a shiny costume. Qin Shi Huang reportedly consumed these compounds in the hope of eternal life. Instead, he died at the age of 49, likely harmed by the very medicine meant to save him. The irony is almost too perfect. A man desperate to defeat death swallowed death by appointment. His empire was enormous, his tomb unforgettable, and his final health plan was basically toxic optimism in pill form. 27. Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu lived with paranoia so intense that ordinary daily life became a security operation. He feared poisoning, contamination, bacteria, radiation, and all the invisible threats that might hide in objects normal people touch without thinking. He reportedly never drank from the same glass twice, and even a bottle could be discarded after one sip. His clothes were treated like potential assassins made of fabric. Before he wore them, security staff sealed garments in plastic bags and wiped them down with alcohol. He also traveled with a chemical engineer who tested his food for poison, microbes, and radioactivity. This was not careful hygiene. This was fear turned into bureaucracy. Imagine ruling a country while believing death might be waiting in your shirt collar, soup bowl, or drinking glass. Ceausescu built a sterile bubble around himself, but the bubble did not make him safer in any meaningful human sense. It only showed how completely terror had colonized his mind. 28. Frederick William I of Prussia had a military obsession, but one particular fixation went far beyond normal army building. He wanted the tallest soldiers in Europe, so he created the famous Potsdam Giants, a regiment made up of exceptionally tall men. Recruiters searched across the continent, offering money, pressure, and sometimes outright force to obtain them. If a man was over 6 feet tall, his height could become a problem he had not personally applied for. In some cases, tall men were kidnapped. The king even pushed bizarre marriage schemes between tall men and tall women, hoping to produce future generations of even taller soldiers. It was less military planning and more human breeding fantasy with uniforms. And here is the ridiculous part. This expensive, carefully collected regiment barely saw real combat. Frederick William adored them too much to risk them. They were his living display pieces, a giant action figure collection in parade formation, impressive, costly, and too precious to use. 29. One of the most famous and officially denied stories about North Korea claims that Kim Jong-un's haircut once became more than a personal style. Reports that appeared in 2014 said male university students were ordered to copy the supreme leader's distinctive look, shaved high on the sides, heavier on top, and radiating the unmistakable energy of authoritarian grooming. Female students were reportedly encouraged to wear a bob similar to that of his wife, Ri Sol-ju. Whether the story was exaggerated, misunderstood, or completely denied, it spread because it felt like the perfect symbol of totalitarian absurdity. A state that already controls speech, media, movement, and loyalty reaching all the way to hair is almost too believable. Imagine going to campus not just to study, but to become one more carefully trimmed echo of the leader. In this version of dictatorship, obedience did not stop at politics. It climbed onto your head and demanded symmetry. 30. Ludwig II of Bavaria, the fairy tale king, built some of the most dreamlike castles in Europe, including Neuschwanstein. But inside those gorgeous palaces, his life often drifted into loneliness and fantasy. Ludwig was intensely shy, socially anxious, and increasingly uncomfortable with real people. So he created dinners for guests who did not exist. Servants would prepare elaborate multi-course meals, set full places at the table, and pour wine for empty chairs while the king conversed with imaginary companions. Some of these invisible guests were historical figures he admired, such as Marie Antoinette or Louis XIV. The scene feels absurd at first, almost like royal theater performed for furniture. But it is also sad. Ludwig had the money to build castles that looked like dreams, yet he often could not fill them with living company he trusted or enjoyed. His banquets had ceremony, luxury, food, wine, and conversation. The only missing ingredient was reality. 31. As Byzantine Empress Zoe grew older, her obsession with preserving youth became more and more unsettling. Her private rooms reportedly turned into a kind of royal cosmetics laboratory, filled with perfumes, mixtures, beauty treatments, and experiments aimed at fighting time itself. But her strangest demand involved the young women who served her. Zoe required her maids-in-waiting to sit motionless in her presence for long stretches, arranged around the room like living decorations. She did not necessarily speak to them or treat them as companions. She simply looked at them, studying their youth and beauty as if they were precious objects placed there for her contemplation. It was court life transformed into a silent museum of envy. The young women became reminders of what Zoe feared losing, forced to perform stillness for a ruler, battling age with cosmetics and control. It is bizarre, creepy, and strangely human all at once. A powerful empress surrounded by youth, unable to command time to stop. 32. Most people avoid a boring preacher by skipping church, arriving late, or suddenly discovering a mysterious headache. King James VI of Scotland allegedly chose a far more dramatic strategy. He was said to be so unbearably bored by the sermons of a local minister that normal avoidance was not enough. Instead of simply refusing to attend, he reportedly had his castle dismantled, stone by stone, moved several miles away, and rebuilt out of earshot. That is not passive aggression. That is passive aggression with cranes, masons, horses, laborers, and a treasury. Imagine being such a dull speaker that the king does not silence you, dismiss you, or complain politely. he relocates architecture. Whether the story is taken as literal fact, royal legend, or an exaggerated tale of elite impatience, the image is perfect. James did not just ghost a preacher. He made an entire building ghost him too. With enough power, even avoiding awkward Sunday sermons can become a construction project. So now be honest. Which ruler here had the most deranged demand, and which absolute maniac did we miss? Drop the name in the comments, but come ready to defend it, because he was weird is not enough. We want the ruler, the demand, and why it deserves a place among history's most ridiculous power trips. And if this list made you laugh at humanity's terrible decision-making skills, hit like and subscribe before some king renames the button after his mother.